Hello, and welcome to tranScrip Talks, the podcast for biotech and pharma companies seeking strategic, practical, and expert-led guidance across the entire product lifecycle, from translation to prescription. I am Rienk Pypstra, the Chief Medical Officer at tranScrip, and I'm your host for this episode. In today's conversation, we'll focus on antimicrobial resistance, and we'll explore the difficulties and how to overcome, mitigate, or avoid those difficulties. I'm delighted to be joined by Marc Lemonnier, the Chief Executive Officer at Antabio. So Marc, can you briefly tell us a little bit about your background, please?
Well, thank you very much, Rienk, and thanks for having me. I am a molecular microbiologist by training. Have a PhD from the University of Toulouse, studied the mechanism of resistance and virulence of bacteria. And then I started Antabio. I'm the founder of Antabio on the basis of getting this knowledge that I had of those mechanisms of resistance and virulence of bacteria and trying to translate that into a product development endeavor. And we started Antabio in 2010. And then I'm also one of the founding fathers of the BIM Alliance, together with my colleagues Florence Séjourné, Marc Gitzinger, Mark Jones, and others. And I'm also a member of the Scientific Advisory Board of GPI AMR, which is now the European Partnership for One Health AMR, which is a global initiative to support R&D in this space. So that's me.
Thank you. Just to introduce myself to our audience, I spent most of my professional career in pharmaceutical companies developing drugs, anti-infective drugs. I worked for big companies like GSK, Pfizer, AstraZeneca. I also worked in small to mid-sized companies, Allegra, Basilea. And currently I am working as a consultant at tranScrip, and one of our big clients is you. And so I support Antabio also as the Chief Medical Officer at Antabio. This is going to be an interesting discussion because the area of antimicrobial resistance is very controversial in the sense that it hasn't been very successful to develop new drugs for the area. And so I would like to delve a little bit deeper into that conundrum that on the one hand, there is a big unmet medical need and everyone is saying, oh, we need to have new drugs. And on the other hand, there is the problem that it doesn't seem to be that attractive to engage in this field, and companies that have started have not really succeeded. So can you give us a little bit of your insights on that dichotomy?
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, the AMR problem is globally recognized as being a huge unmet need. So, and I don't think in the future we're seeing this problem self-resolve. We see that also, in addition to the classical hurdles and challenging science, the fact that there's spread of resistant pathogens, that medical procedures become riskier. There is also, for example, the anti-vaccination sentiment. How is that going to impact the evolution of AMR in such patients? And some wars as well. So we see civilians and soldiers in certain war zones in the world. So the problem may get bigger and bigger. However, we still are to find a sustainable solution for the economic problem. And that's a tricky one. And yes, there's been failures. You could argue that those failures are caused by a set of different reasons, lack of differentiation maybe for some products, but also, of course, low profitability. These are drugs that are, the treatment duration is short. These are given for days, not months or years. They're priced cheaply. They want to be reserved, the new ones, for drug-resistant infections and not used widely to not spread resistance. So there's many reasons why the economics are complex for this area. But we're seeing new initiatives, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about them later. But I think we're at a point where there's a lot of thinking about how to solve the broken market problem. And there are now, as opposed to a few years ago, true and tangible initiatives in place.
Yeah, that is good, because the world does need new antibiotics. It has been clear for a while, and there have been many calls for new antibiotics, and the bacteria don't stop evolving. It's evolution at a very, very fast pace, just because of the numbers. There are so many pathogens, there are so many different mechanisms, and you have multiple generations in a daytime. So emergence of resistance and selection of the most efficient mechanisms of resistance happens on a daily basis everywhere in the world. And with global motility of the human population, we are bringing the bacteria across every continent, and pathogens that in the past, a couple of 100 years ago, would have stayed very local, we're seeing them spreading everywhere. And that is certainly a fear that governments and public health officials have, is that if resistance emerges somewhere, it will come to us. Nevertheless, there is insufficient public money available to pay for the solutions, because it seems to be a long distance problem rather than okay, we need to solve this today, or otherwise I will not be elected. And I think that's part of the problem as well. So there is clearly a biological explanation why it is happening, and the environment there's insufficient urgency in the environment to justify the pricing, and I think that all leads to the problems that we have seen.
Indeed. And I think that unfortunately, the way I see it is we're going to have probably to hit a wall to react, because I think WHO and other organizations that are mapping the territory, mapping the problem, are doing a great job. And they're maybe not as supported by current administrations in the most healthy, wealthy countries as it was in the past. So those organizations need to be able to do their job, to map the problem. And then the companies, and therefore all the tools to support those companies, be push incentives, need to focus on the most urgent unmet needs that have been identified, right? In our company, for example, and you know very well, Rienk, we have made the choice of focusing on the highest unmet medical needs, trying to develop drugs that are differentiated, clinically useful, and addressing the critical priority pathogens. So our lead program, meropenem 3310, is a BL-BLI combination. So for those that are not familiar with the spaces, beta-lactamase inhibitor combination, and has the property, the uniqueness of covering a broad spectrum of pathogens, including CREs and CRAB. And that's our differentiation. That's what we bring to the table. And we're positioning that drug for a critical unmet need among the critical unmet needs, which is hospital infections, and more particularly nosocomial pneumonia. And we think that drug could be used empirically for patients that are high risk of multi-drug resistant infections. And when we look at the world, and we go to China, the Middle East, Europe, the US, everywhere in the world, we can see that there's a need for those drugs. So I think that by doing that, we are de-risking actually the company as a whole. And I'm thinking also about our shareholders, because there will always be a need for drugs that are addressing a high unmet need like this. And pull incentives will happen, and I think they will support this kind of developments. So I think the choice we make is really not only to develop a drug for patients, but also making something that from an economical point of view makes sense and therefore can succeed where others failed.
Yeah, let's believe in that. Because as we discussed in the beginning, several companies have failed. There was a series of companies that managed to bring their product all the way to the finish line, but then failed to commercialize.
Yes, well, I think again, those companies were good companies, very talented people, great ideas, supported by, blue chip investors. So there's nothing arrogant in what I'm going to say. However, I see that the lack of differentiation of the proposal and maybe sometimes a repeated pattern or going through the same path that did not succeed is justified because this is such a harsh environment. It's very difficult to be creative and reckless in this space. And so I understand that, but I think that I'm not saying we need to be reckless, but we need to be creative and try things that have not been done before, especially try new ways of providing proof of concept in the clinic that this is indeed different, therefore useful, and try to think of clinical trials and all the program as something that needs to convince not only your investors and yourself, but the regulators, the payers, the clinicians, a full set of people that have a problem that you need to solve. It's not just about solving our own problems, it's solving someone else's problem. So there's a mindset here where I think Antabio is quite good. We're an agile animal. We adapt quickly to a changing environment. And by the way, this is something I like very much about tranScrip, because tranScrip is a little bit like Antabio. When we have a problem, we go to tranScrip. It's like a restaurant menu, So what am I going to have today? So do I have a need, for example, in market access or clinical operations or regulatory affairs? I will find the solution in tranScrip. And that's why we work so well together, because we're two agile animals. And agility is everything in this field. If you cannot adapt and understand that maybe there's another path that can lead you to success, then the chances of failing are high, and we don't want that.
So in recent years, there have been quite a number of initiatives trying to facilitate drug development for drugs in the AMR space. I'm thinking of very specific guidelines that the regulators made, the streamlined development path, the limited population pathway that the FDA put up. It's still not a straightforward drug development process, but it has been clarified and simplified. What I also have noticed is the Netflix type of funding, so the subscription model that has been adopted by some European countries. And of course, there have been significant push incentives available as well that were made available to help fund promising drugs, and the AMR Action Fund is one of them, but also the support that BARDA has been given globally has been very important. But we're still not seeing a lot of companies jumping into this arena, and we know that we need more antibiotics. So my question to you is, what is still missing out there? What do you think would help other CEOs to say, I'm going to start up a company and I'm going to develop a new antibiotic?
We're missing a success. A big headlines with very positive news that a company made it to the finish line and was a commercial success. And that will happen when we have pool incentives. So the pool incentives are some countries already have implemented. You mentioned the UK subscription model was a pilot and now is a permanent model. The Swedish also have their own subscription model. It's slightly different. The Australians, I really love their approach. Recently, they announced we're going to just take the UK model adapted to Australia. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. Italy, Japan, Canada, all this is coming. However, coordination is lacking. I'm not saying we need the same, it will never happen, to have the same pool incentive for everybody, every country. That's not important. What is important is that globally, each one contributes its fair share to the problem, and that there's some coordination. So now developers know that if they develop the drug, they are going to be rewarded. Innovation will be rewarded. And once that happens, then the investors say, okay, now I can see an exit for my companies. I can invest again. So really pool incentives need to happen. Europe and the US are going to be critical. This is the news everyone is waiting for. I think Europe, through the renewed pharmaceutical legislation, they have a mandate to come up with a pool incentive. Is that going to be a transferable exclusivity voucher or a subscription model? We still don't know, but something will happen. The US is a bigger question mark now, not only for scientific or legislative reasons, but also because there's some uncertainty on the direction that the US are going to take. But I think that's the key. And once that happens, I think that the few companies left among themselves, Antabio, have the right teams, a very thick skin that makes them very resilient, and we will be there to provide the solutions that the world needs.
And can you speculate about some other global players like China, for example?
Well, China is a very interesting example, actually, because there's a huge unmet need there, and this is something that we're seeing in terms of the development of resistance, the prevalence of those pathogens, and the fact that it's a huge country with a very well-organized public health system, so able to actually implement solutions in a very efficient way. And I think there is appetite there for innovation. So China is something to have clearly on the map as a company, and not only in terms of a market, but also to learn on how in the future, AMR, the solution as well as the problems are going to be shaped by this new, let's say, big player in the field, which is China and other Asian countries, by the way. So yes, China could be not only a market, but eventually a source of partners, innovation, collaborations, acquisitions, and that's new and needs to be really, really looked very, very closely.
So if we would have to summarize your view on drug development for AMR, are you overall positive? Are you seeing the future with hope or with fear?
I'm happily pessimistic, I have to say. And let me explain you what I mean by that. I mean that I'm pessimistic in the way that I don't think that AMR is going to self-resolve. I think the problem is going to get bigger and bigger. And yes, it's worrisome that patients are going to die again because we're not bringing the solutions that they need. That's my pessimistic angle. But my optimistic angle is that I see that the world has understood that solutions need to arrive now. I see pool incentives coming in Europe. I see countries legislating new models of rewarding innovation in the space. I see companies like Antabio that are resilient, are here to stay, are managing to develop their products. I see tranScrip, I see organizations that support these companies. I see AMR Action Fund, CARBEX, EIC Accelerator. So we're not alone. There is enough critical mass of intelligence, money, and powerful solutions coming their way, so that I think we're going to succeed in addressing this problem. Yeah.
Thank you. So if you were to advise a CEO who wants to start up a new company developing an antibiotic for multi-drug resistant pathogens, what would your advice be to that CEO?
Well, my advice would be to keep their eyes wide open, meaning talking to experts that can give you the tricks, people who've been there, talking to learning from failure as well. It's very important, not only from success, trying to understand what went wrong, why haven't we succeeded in bringing this innovation as efficiently as we should. What are the tricks? In other words, when we are a CEO and we start a company, we're focusing and are quite obsessed on the business plan. It means, what do I want? What do I need? What's my vision? It's my. But at some point, you need quickly to realize that it's not about solving your problems. It's about solving someone else's problems. The investors have problems. They're not sitting on the pile of money waiting for someone to take it. They have also a mandate. Clinicians, they're not just prescribing and that's it. They have a responsibility. They understand their patients. They know why their patients may be at risk of dying, and you need to solve their problem, and so on. The pricing and the reimbursement people, they also they have a mandate from society. So, and that, as often people, when they start a company, they don't realize that they have to develop a product that is addressing not your own problems or your own vision, but the problems of society. So keep your eyes open, speak to people, to experts, understand what went wrong, and try to find your own solution.
Thank you, Marc, for such insightful conversation. I think our listeners will take a lot from the discussion. There are a few takeaways that I remembered from today's episode. In the first place, let's continue to be optimistic about the prospects of developing new drugs for antimicrobial resistance. But on the other side, let's make sure that we do not only consider our own interests and our own deliverables, but that we really focus on what the societal needs are, and that will help us to bring forward new medicines that are really needed. And lastly, let's hope that our politicians put the right pull incentives in place to facilitate all of this. If today's discussion has sparked new ideas or questions, we'd love to hear from you. You can find more about tranScrip at our website, transcrip-group.com, or you can connect on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to tranScrip Talks on your favorite podcast platform, and stay tuned for more conversations that bridge the science and strategy of drug development. Thank you again, Marc, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much.